Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. So this is AEC Tech Academy virtual workshop series. And today we're going to be talking about using TT Toolbox and specifically a plugin for TT Toolbox called Colibri. If you haven't used TT Toolbox before, TT Toolbox is a plugin for Grasshopper 3D that was released by Core Studio several years ago and has had several updates over the past couple of years as well. And among those is a tool, Calibri, which allows you to aggregate data sets. What that basically means is it lets you take a parametric model and run through a whole series of the options and kind of develop a report out of that. The other application we'll be talking about is one called Thread, which is our online web app that's available for everyone to try. Just to reiterate, today's workshop is AIA accredited. If you have any questions on that or issues, please feel free to follow up with Shannon on those. And if you didn't get a chance to check out the presentation beforehand, there's a series of links here to download the sample files if you wanted to follow along today, as well as you can see a kind of preview of a Thread report, which is a kind of data visualization layouts that we'll be looking at. There's also downloads to all the software and plugins, including Rhino, which you have to buy, and then our other plugins. Listed here is also a older project, which is called Design Explorer, which was an open source data visualization platform that was released several years ago and still has a pretty active user base. So if you're interested in the kind of content we're looking at today, a little bit of Design Explorer, but it's kind of a lighter weight solution. Additionally, I've put out there a kind of Swarm, and this is just a shameless plug for our web application Swarm. Swarm app with the kind of background project that we'll be using today. So if you want to try that out, I believe at this point it's open for anyone to use. So just a quick rundown of what we're going to be going through today. So we're going to talk about how to extract certain types of data from a geometric model, in this case just a little kind of sample tower. And we're going to talk about how to then combine that data with a series of images using Calibri to generate a data set or a design space. So the idea behind this is, let's say you're working on a design proposal with kind of multiple different possible facets for geometric transformation or other possible changes. And if you've ever done this before, you know, it's kind of a painful process to go through, you know, potentially hundreds of iterations and begin to catalog that work and then interpret it. This kind of workflow today is really based around expediting that entire process and getting you to the kind of evaluation or curation period faster, with less time spent on the kind of production end. The output of that will be a data set and a series of images, which you could use for any particular application you have in mind. But these pair up nicely with these two applications, Thread and Design Explorer, which we'll be talking about. And so when we move on from Grasshopper up to the web application Thread, we'll spend a little time talking about what that program is, how it works, and then how you can share that content externally. The Grasshopper file provided in the sample, this is just kind of a little map key for you to understand what the different parts of it do. And we'll primarily be focusing on kind of areas 2, 4, and 5, which are the kind of data extraction and the Calibri simulation setup. There's a pretty simple kind of parametric tower in the background, and if anyone has any questions about that or anything along the way, feel free to ask. But we won't be spending too much time today talking about the actual kind of parametric tower design. It's really just there to give us some data to begin to look at and analyze. And if you were at yesterday's workshop or you're planning to attend tomorrow, you'll notice it's the same tower across all 3 projects. Excuse me. And so that is also the same tower that's shared on Swarm. So we're trying to provide a little bit of continuity to show how you can use data and model geometry in tandem before getting into something like a SD or a DD design. We might be developing a true BIM model. With that said, if anyone has any questions throughout the course of the workshop today, please feel free to either ask them in chat or ask them directly over the video call. Either one is fine. So I won't spend too long in this video, but everyone should have a link to the presentation so you can go back and watch it and check out the other kind of stuff we have on our YouTube channel. But this is a little bit of a preview of kind of what Thread is, and it basically goes through the explanation of the entire data upload and creation process that we're going to be covering today. So if you want to recap anything from today's workshop in kind of an expedited fashion, this video will show you kind of how to go through and work with the Thread web application. Additionally, if you're interested in the open source kind of sister program to this, Design Explorer, there's a little getting started video here that shows you how this works. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between Design Explorer and Thread when we get to that portion of the workshop. But this video kind of gives you an idea of the type of things you can do with Design Explorer. And then at the end of the presentation, there are just a whole series of kind of basic Grasshopper concepts, some of which we might be covering in some of these workshops, talking about things like flattening, the difference between a series and a range. And these are just kind of foundational concepts inside of Grasshopper. So if you're playing with the Grasshopper file later on and you're maybe not the most comfortable with using Grasshopper, there's a few kind of little helpers here to explain what's going on in a few of the moments. Okay. So with that, before we jump into Grasshopper, I wanted to kind of give a little preview of what it is we're going for at the end of the workshop today. And that is, we're going to be creating a Thread report and series of dashboards from our data set that we're going to generate outside of Grasshopper and our kind of preview images as well. And when we upload this to Thread, what we have the ability to do is we have the ability to chart and interact with the data in multiple different ways. We're just looking at one particular layout here, where we can actually begin to filter down option based on, let's say, a goal of minimizing the number of unique panels, and then potentially looking for the highest floor area out of that set. And what we're doing is we're now basically parsing through the data that was exported from Grasshopper in this kind of interactive environment that then lets us go through and understand really what's going on within our project and how the different performative criteria may weigh against one another. Because again, if you've worked on projects like this before with kind of multivariate problems, you know there's very rarely one design solution that matches everything. But it's really about explaining the kind of compromises and trade-offs that are required to hit the kind of project goals. And that's really kind of the goal of Design Explorer and Thread as well. And the other nice thing about Thread is your layout types are completely customizable. So we have several widgets that you can recombine for data visualization and interaction. So in the previous one, we were looking at iterations of hundreds of designs and filtering through them. In this one, we're doing the same thing, but we're looking at one option that has a specific combination of parameters. So you can create a kind of report that gives you something similar to a Grasshopper definition. Even though the content's static, people can still cycle through the different options and kind of explore the range of design options available within your particular project. So the next couple steps we're going to go through in Grasshopper are really about generating this range of designs that we can later explore inside of the Thread web application. One quick note, if you haven't signed up for Thread already, I recommend that everyone does. And if you go to, it's a quick autocomplete. If you go to Thread and you haven't before, you can go to the login and sign up page, and you can sign up for a core account. And we will approve you so that you can have access to Swarm of Mirar. And if you have any issues with this, feel free to pop over to the Slack channel or bring something up in chat here in Ring Central. Okay. Are there any questions before we get started? Great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go over to Rhino and Grasshopper. And I'm working from the sample file that was provided. We can basically see what the sample file is creating is it's created this kind of a twisted, kind of morphed tower option. And this tower was developed just to kind of give us a range of geometric solutions across the facade and then look at how we can compare that data. I'm certainly not going to claim it's the greatest tower I've ever designed. Well, it's not the worst either. And sorry, I'm just panning around for a minute to look for the input here. Here it is. Okay, and the two pieces of geometry that we're generating with this tower is we're generating a series of facade panels and we're generating a series of floor plates. So the scenario here is, let's say that we've gotten a brief from the client, we've got some design intent in place, we have our stack chart, so we have an understanding now of the program areas we want to hit, and so now we want to kind of explore our range of options within the design of the tower, and then see which one of those gives us perhaps the best or most optimal kind of facade layout relative to perhaps the most interesting or engaging form, and also hits our area targets. So we have multiple goals and we have multiple potential parameters to input. So we could sit here and we could go through and animate slider by slider, step by step, each one of these and begin to kind of evaluate that entire field. Or we could use something like Galapagos to try to find one or two best fit solutions within here. However, it's a little difficult with both of those methods to begin to understand all the implications for paneling, floor plate area, building mass, and potentially other metrics we could load in here, such as daylighting or something like that. And so what we really kind of want is we want to be able to get that data into a platform like Thread so that we can start to visually explore those results and understand the kind of combination of data. And to do that, we're going to use Calibri. But before we jump into Calibri, let's just take a look at a few of the kind of structural parts of this file. So all of the parameters that drive the massing are available over here in this kind of white box. And this contains everything from the kind of fillet angles to the core size to the overall height and floor to floors. Just to walk through real quick, those are all combined into a series of parameters that then have some simple kind of graph mappers applied to them, which kind of give us this tapered shape we're seeing over here. And then there's a kind of series of steps that go through and create the floor plates from those results, and also a series of steps then that go through and create the facade. And what we get coming out of that is we get a series of lofted surfaces that we're just turning into meshes so that we can color those meshes and kind of get our analysis preview inside of our Rhino viewport. Okay. And then we get to the part where we're now going to be interacting with Colibri. And if you took yesterday's workshop, it's a very similar kind of format. What we're doing is we're going through the geometry of this model, and we're extracting a series of parameters. And those parameters that we're going to look at for this particular project are we're going to look at pulling out the floor plate area that's smallest, the floor plate area that's largest, the maximum floor area deviation, which is the difference between those two, and then the floor area for all of the floor plates together. And unlike the previous example where we were baking out each one of these metrics per floor in yesterday's workshop, what we're doing here is we're looking at gross or averaged values for the entire tower, because the data set we're combining will be aligned with one tower option at a time. Now, you could go through a process like this and actually map out the data per panel or something like that, if that's how you wanted to use Thread. But for our purposes, what we're really looking at is a series of massing options. And the same type of operations have been applied down to the facade below, where we're looking at three different things here. We're looking at the total facade area, so how much surface area glazing there is. We're looking at the total number of panels, which is maybe something we want to optimize for. And we're also looking for the percent of those panels that's planar. And so as we go through those different values, we can see we might have a design that we like, but it has a lot of non-planar panels, which might will have a higher cost. So that's something we may want to track as part of our metrics. Now, that being said, these are just kind of 7 data points I wanted to pull out and look at, but they're certainly not the only ones you can use. So this data can be completely bespoke for the project you're working on. The important thing is in this type of simulation, because we're looking at one tower option at a time, you want to make sure you just have one single value coming out for each one of these. Okay, and now that we have our geometry in place and a preview inside of Rhino, and we have our floor areas and our other data pulled out, what we want to do is we want to combine those outputs and results together with a combination of inputs and then run a simulation on all that. And then this is where we get into using Colibri. So I'm going to go to the TT Toolbox tab, and I'm going to go down to the Colibri panel inside of the tab. And the first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at the Colibri iterator. And you're going to notice that Colibri has several components that work together to both set up and produce results for the simulation. But the one we're going to begin with is the iterator, which allows us to kind of set up our inputs and outputs. And so we can see an example of this already wired up down here, where we have our width and we have the fillet value. And the reason we're doing that is because mostly for time. But if I begin to go in and look at these values, so I'm going to go in and plug in maybe my width, and the minute I do that, Sorry, was there a question? No, sorry, okay. When I plug in the width, it's going to tell me that I have 31 possible, or 31 iterations that will be created. And the reason for this is if I go into the width input here and double click on that slider, I can see that I'm doing a digit step of 2 every time, and I'm incrementing from 30 to 60, and I'm on integers. So I only have 31 values between 30 and 60 to iterate through within the current settings of this slider. So if I were to move it, I'd be moving through 31 values. But if I want to look at the combination of that combined with, let's say, something like the glazing divisions, which I'll plug in here, I'm going to see I have a huge jump that takes place already. Now I have 3,131. Now we can produce this many results, but that's a lot of images to produce, and that's a lot of time for the simulation to run. So we may want to pare that down. And I can do that in a couple ways. One, I'll notice I have that many possibilities because I have a number here which has 2.0. If I just switch that over to an integer, I'll drop that value down to 10, and I'll get 341 possible values. But maybe what I'm not really interested in is the glazing divisions. But what I'm really interested in inside of, what I'm really interested in inside of my simulation is I'm going to grab the iterator again, and I'm interested in the width, and I'm interested in kind of beginning to vary the filleting at the extent within the geometry here to see how much that impacts the planarity of the panel. But I want to be able to adjust my fillet value from a range of, 5 to 20, so that I can have this kind of tighter fillet running down the entire geometry, or I can taper it to this larger fillet in the middle. And if we look at this slider, we're going to see we have a little asterisk on it. And what this is telling us is this is telling us that an expression or an equation has actually been applied to this slider. And that's really important when using something like Calibri, because it can let us create a slider that will go from a value of 5 to 20, but only do it in 4 steps. And the way that you can achieve this is if you open up that slider, is you can use an expression. And in this case, we're using expression x, which is Grasshopper's default for whatever the output number is of a particular parameter, times 5. So what this is doing is it's taking whatever value I feed in for the minimum and whatever value I feed in for the maximum, and it's multiplying it by 5. And that means that any value that I sample, in this case between 1 and 4, will actually now be between 5 and 20. So I can pare down the number of possible options that I'm going to generate here, and I can also jump by a larger number and get a more accurate reflection of the value coming out of here being 5 to 20, rather than just 1 to 4, which wouldn't give me accurate information inside of Colibri. And again, the other thing I'm doing here is I'm switching this over to an integer. So I'm just making sure I don't have any decimal values, because that'll increase by a tenfold every time I would add an additional decimal point. So if I were to take my fillet value and plug it into the Calibri iterator, I now see that I have 124, which seems like a reasonable amount of options to try to run through for today's workshop. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete my old iterator component. And one thing I can notice is every time I plug in new input, I get an additional input value coming in here. I can remove them and swap them out, but occasionally I get a little bug when I do this. So usually if I'm dealing with a limited number of inputs, let's say 5 or less, and I screw up, I'm just going to create a new component and put it there. Typically it works fine. So again, I can keep plugging values into here, and I'll keep getting an input in that adds on every time. But that would continue to increase my total number of iterations that I'm going to run. And what Calibri is going to do now is similar to if you've ever used animate on a slider, you know that you can kind of incrementally have it animate through the values within the slider itself. Calibri is basically going to be doing the same thing, but instead of just animating through one slider, it's going to animate through all the sliders, incrementally stepping through them so that we produce all possible combinations of these values for our results. Okay, and we can already see that we're getting some pinching here in the geometry because I deleted the old Calibri component. And that's the important next step is we want to make sure that whenever we're using Calibri, we see we not only have inputs, but we have matching outputs. And so wherever these values were supposed to go to, just let me bring back that component so I can remember that. Wherever this slider was previously plugged into, we now need to make sure that the output of the Colibri iterator is what gets plugged into that value there. So here we can see that we will plug this into the width values here and here, which is now controlling the tapering, the geometry. And I'm also apparently putting it into this value here, right, which is controlling the kind of differential tapering between the top and the bottom. And so previously, if that slider was plugged into those values, now when I plug it in here, basically whenever the values get updated by Calibri, they'll be updated down the line. I should also have an additional fillet value, which apparently I did not plug in. And I want to figure out where that goes real quick. So let's see here. Okay. So here's a good example. My fillet value is still coming out of 20 and going into the inputs here for the domain. And I want to make sure to plug in the output for Calibri in there instead. So now when the Calibri values get updated as it iterates through the options, it will replace those. And so now I can just see that both my width and my fillet values are only going down to my iterator components. Okay. So with that in place, we actually have everything we need to actually begin to run the simulation, but we don't want to run it just yet because we want to be able to pull metrics out or results from the final geometry that gets produced. And so to do that, I'm going to temporarily pan way over. Oops, actually I'm just going to drag this component over towards the end so I can kind of keep everything together. And what we're going to look at now is we're going to look at how we can combine the outputs with our parameters component into the aggregator component here, which will let us actually run the simulation. So I'm going to go ahead and move these up, move them out of the way for a minute, and we're going to recreate those inputs. So the next thing we wanted to do is we've combined together our inputs in this location, and now we want to combine together our outputs as well. And so this is going to be the data that we're extracting through model at the end of the day. That's going to let us know how well it performs. To do that, I'm going to go to the Calibri dropdown again under TT Toolbox tab, and I'm going to go to the Calibri parameters. And when I click on the Calibri parameters and drop it in here, it's going to have this very similar format to my iterator, where it has an input value that as I begin to plug value into it, such as the floor area first, it's going to go in and, excuse me, it's going to add an additional input. And so I can go through here and plug in each one of my values, and I'll see what's happening is it's actually picking up the name of the parameter output and putting it into the input naming here. So if I rename one of these components, let's say floor areas, and then replug it in again, it will see that value gets updated now to floor areas. So when we plug in the component, it will inherit the name from the component that's plugged into it, which gives us a really easy way to kind of name the values that are going to be associated with each data point. And so I'll continue this going down from my facade area, my number of panels, and my percentage planar. And now I have my 7 values plus a blank 8th one, which will be unused, combined together into one parameter set as a list. And so now I have my input parameters, or my inputs for my width and my fillet, and I have my outputs collected together. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, great. So what I'm going to do now that I have my inputs and my outputs combined together is I want to combine those together into the aggregator component, which is going to match up those inputs and outputs and then generate the content that gets written out to a text file or CSV that we will then use to upload to Thread. So to do this, I'm going to go to the Calibri dropdown again, and this time I'm going to go down to the Calibri aggregator, which is the little Calibri guy who's trying to fly away. And I'm going to drop this in here. And I have several inputs I can look at. Let's start off with the ones we already know we have in place, and those are the genome, which is this input here. And we'll see the output of the iterator creates what's called the genome. And if you've used Galapagos before, it's just picking up from the same naming as Galapagos for genomes and phenomes. which are basically inputs and outputs. So I'm going to plug in my genome into my genome input on my aggregator. And it's now going to tell me that I actually have everything I need to run the simulation, but I wanted to track the phenome, which are the parameter outputs here. So I'm going to plug that in. And now I'm combining together both the inputs and the outputs, which will be collected as a data, a row, or a data point for each one of my options that I run. Now, technically, this is everything I need to get it running. All I need to do now is tell it where I want to store the results. And to do that, I'm going to go to my desktop. Just do that momentarily. And I'm going to do what I always do in these workshops, which is just create a random folder called new folder 2. And I'm going to copy the address to that folder. And I have two options for how I want to bring this in to Grasshopper. One is if I want to make sure I can always manually verify it, I can create a panel and just paste that value in there. And this is the link now to the folder where the results from this simulation will be collected. The other way I can do it is I can use a file path component, which can be found under parameters. I believe it's primitive, file path. And what that's going to let me do is that's going to let me use a Windows browser. To select a folder, which I can do here. Go into folder 2. Okay. And I would get the exact same thing. So either one of these would work as an input to the folder. Just keep in mind, if you open a file like this on another machine, or even if you've downloaded a sample file, you're going to see the default one is empty, because every one of these paths will, of course, be unique to wherever your folder structure happens to be, unless you're using a network. So I'll go ahead and plug in that file path to the folder there. And now I can look in that folder, and nothing has been created at the moment. However, I am successfully pointing to correct file path because I'm not getting an error showing up at this point. Now, from this, I could go ahead and I could run the simulation. And to do that, what I can do is this last input here, right, I can use a Boolean toggle component on that input and toggle it to true. Now, what's going to happen is if I go to that folder is I'm going to get a CSV, which is a comma separated value file, which is essentially a data table or an Excel file is another way to think about it. And if I were to open that in Excel, what I'll see is I basically created my default structure for my simulation. And I can see here I have my input of width as a column label. I have an input of a fillet as a column label. And I have an output for each one of my individual results that I specified. And I also have an additional input over here for an image. And this is a really important one if we want to save those kind of thumbnail images we saw previously. To save those images, I can actually just use it as the default and it will collect the data automatically, but I can customize the way that I want that image to look. And to do that, I can go back to the TT Toolbox tab, and I can go to Calibri, and I can go down to the image settings. And this will let me specify how it is that image is going to be collected. Now, one thing I recommend doing when you do this is, as you're saving those images, setting the width and the height and the views, test it inside of Rhino first to make sure that your model is not being cut off or off-center or something. And the way I'll usually do that is either use view capture to file or view capture to clipboard, either one. And I'm going to see, as soon as it gives me the little preview here, whoops. I have somehow gotten it to lock up. Ah, I see. It's hidden underneath my meeting information. So here I can see I would have an issue that even though I've centered it on my screen over here, that's not actually centered on the viewport. So I want to make sure that my preview is centered on the viewport. There's a couple ways I could do this. You know, one might be to just dock Rhino a little bit, kind of extend it. And let's get Grasshopper back. And so now I'm going to go in and I'm going to view capture. Again, I'm going to say, okay, now it's nicely centered. So I'm fine with this result. And I can see that I'm also using a square pixel size, 1200 by 1200, which might be what I want for a simulation like this. So now that I kind of know that my image is centered and in the correct place on my viewport, I might zoom out a little bit because I know it's going to be transforming. I can go in and specify the same ratio, which I have a width and a height here, currently set to 600. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and do that at 300, which means we're going to get some more pixelated results in thread in this first pass, but we will be able to view capture it more quickly. So for both my width and my height, I'm going to plug in 300, and now that's going to set the image size. The other thing I can do is I can go in and I can rename, or I can specify the viewport that I want to look at. And I have to be careful here that this is case sensitive. So I can plug that into my view. But now I can see at the end that I'm getting perspective as a viewport with a width of 300 and a height of 600. But if I notice here, it actually says views, which means I can save out multiple views at once. So maybe I want to save out both a perspective view and perhaps the right view. So I'm going to take both of those, and their actual size doesn't necessarily matter in the view here. It's just more making sure that the image itself is centered and in the location we want. And so I can now use both perspective and right. But I have to be careful here again. If you're a Grasshopper user, you've probably been caught by this a few times, that now it's looking for a viewport that's called perspective right. And the reason it's doing that is because my panel is now treating this as a paragraph instead of a list of text objects. So to fix that, I want to just right-click on my panel and make sure to go down to multi-line data here and uncheck this option. Click on it. And now I'll see this shows up in a more standard-looking Grasshopper list structure. And I'll now see in my image settings that I have views now separated by commas called perspective right. Whereas if I hadn't done multi-line data, when I hover the mouse over here, I would see my view name is just called perspective right as one continuous view name. It's not treating as two separate ones. But by doing this now, what I have the ability to do is I have the ability to actually capture multiple views simultaneously with my simulation, which is pretty good. So we'll let that go. All right. So I'm going to take the result of my image settings, and I'm going to go ahead and plug it to the image settings input over here. Give this a little more space to breathe. Okay. Let's pull it out a little bit further. Okay. And the last thing I could have done on image settings is something I recommend not doing unless you really kind of know how to create your own custom naming, which is I can change the default name that each one of the image results gets generated as. And there are times when you might want to do this, such as if you have too many parameters that the file name is excessive and not even hit Windows limit for file naming. But the other reason is, let's say that you're trying to produce a series of iterations, multiples of them that you want to keep that naming more consistent. You could set up your own custom naming here. The issue you have to be aware of is if you use the duplicate name every time that it runs that simulation, it's going to overwrite that same image. So I recommend, particularly when you're starting out, just leaving this as default. Okay, but what do we have now? So we have our parameters that we've collected. We have our iterator that's collecting all of our inputs. We now have our image settings all being combined together into our Calibri aggregator component. We specified the file path where we want to save the results, and we switched on the option here to write the results of our simulation to true. So now we're actually ready to run our simulation. So I'm going to do one last check over all these to make sure everything is wired up correctly. Fingers crossed. And we're going to go ahead and run it. And it's just going to tell me that there are 2 inputs connected and 124 out of 124 iterations will be done. This is your last kind of opportunity to cancel it. So I'm happy with those results, I think. So I'm going to hit yes. And what's going to happen is I'm now going to see that model begin to change incrementally bit by bit and walk through all 124 of those results. Now, as those begin to write out here, I can see that in that folder, it's generating that dual set of thumbnails, the right view and the perspective view for each one of these. It's also generating the data over here, which would continue to add on additional values. So if I were to even hover over this, I would see the file size incrementally begin to increase. Now, If I made a mistake, if I need to cancel the simulation, one thing I can do is I can just delete this running.txt document, and the simulation will stop running. So that gives me the ability, because holding down escape multiple times like you do with Grasshopper a lot of times won't always stop Calibri from running, but just deleting that little running.txt document from the output folder will. That will stop it from actually trying to run through the simulation, so I could fix a mistake if I made it. And another thing that I'll note here is we'll see the preview is currently updating in Rhino. This won't always happen. After several iterations, the number kind of depends on how much memory is being taken up to preview all this. The kind of preview inside of Rhino may stop. You may just see one option need to appear there. But if I were to go to the folder itself, and if I still see items being written, here I can see in my lower left-hand corner that number is increasing down here. Then I know that my iterations are being written out successfully. Okay. So we only have a few more to run for our results, so we'll let that go for a second. And are there any questions while that's running? No? Okay. All right, so we are almost done. Only about 6 more left, I think. Okay. Oh, no, wait, I'm wrong. We're halfway there because I'm doing 2 images. Okay, so this will take a few seconds longer. All right, so while that's running, I'm going to explain one other little quirk that can appear with Calibri. So one thing that can happen when you're running a Calibri simulation and you're trying to capture the image preview is that Rhino's image preview will actually update after the view capture has been done. And that's because the kind of standard Grasshopper preview components don't have an output, and Rhino doesn't have an event, or at least it hasn't until recently. I haven't checked in the past couple of weeks. Doesn't have an event that lets you know when it's done updating drawing to the canvas. So if you remember earlier, and we'll pan over there in a few minutes in the results here, the simulation I set up, I was using colored meshes. And the reason I was using colored meshes is because the colored mesh actually has a geometric output of a mesh coming out of it. And what that means is that in the order of operations in Grasshopper, right? Because everything in Grasshopper runs downstream. You basically go from left to right, from inputs to outputs. When that mesh color component has expired or finished doing what it does, the preview will have been updated in Rhino to reflect that. Then the resulting mesh that comes out of that can be used for other operations. And we'll see in a few minutes when this one is done that, excuse me, that the result of that, the mesh, is then used to pull out the analysis information. So the reason I'm doing this is I'm making sure something that feeds into the Calibri solution, because the last thing Calibri does is capture the image after it's run through updating the input values and then getting the output values. That's the point at which it captures the image using the view capture from Rhino. And because our mesh has already been colored beforehand, we can make sure that the value that we're getting out matches the image that we'll be seeing in a little preview. And you just have to be careful, because depending on how big of a change you're making, sometimes it works to not do that, sometimes it does. Let's see if it's done. Okay, great, it's done. Okay, so just to recap what I was saying here, basically this mesh color component here that I'm using to actually apply the color to all the panels, which were uncolored before that. Which is what I wanted in my preview over here. I'm then using to extract the area information, or at least one of the data points that ultimately feeds into Calibri. And again, this is just important because it helps us go in and be able to make sure that the image is aligned to the data inside of it. So a couple of things to note. Now that our simulation has actually finished, we've produced that updated CSV and those preview files that we saw being created, but the component is also toggled right to false. Now the reason I did this is because you might go in afterwards, you might move a slider or two depending on where this option has been set at, and you don't want Calibri to continue to collect the data, so it automatically turns itself off when it's done. So if I wanted to run another simulation, I just need to make sure to toggle this back to true before writing it. The other thing is I'm getting some information here about what mode Colibri is running in. So a couple things you can do here. Right now, if we were to run this simulation again, what it would do is so long as the parameter names are the same, it would go through and actually overwrite all the preview images and overwrite all the data because it's set to override mode. And the reason for this is, let's say you screwed up, like you left some old floor plates on and they were sticking out in every view, or the angle you chose for the perspective wasn't really the one you wanted. It could be a lot of different things. But there's some reason you want to rerun the simulation to get better data. It happens all the time. This will let you really quickly overwrite it. But I have some options here. I can choose to run an option for run all and append to the end, which will actually go in and add additional data points on. So an example of how you might use this is, let's say that you were doing something like a daylighting simulation. You were doing it in multiple runs, and you wanted to collect all data together in one large file, but you need to keep changing one value manually each time. This would allow you to continuously add on to the data set. The other thing you can do is there's an input over here, which I don't think I've ever actually used, for a sub-selection where I can choose to run a subset. So maybe I thought there was a problem with the daylighting simulation at one place and I wanted to check on that smaller range. I can basically just tell it to only kind of render out the smaller subset here and run through those options. I then have an option in the aggregator to, if that everything turned out to be okay, to just go ahead and run the rest and append it to the end. The other two options here are the default one, which is ask me every time if the folder is not empty. If I reran the simulation, it's going to tell me, hey, you got 100 or 200 and whatever objects in here. Are you sure you want to overwrite it? And click OK. Or if I know I want to keep overwriting it, maybe I have some more advanced workflow in place, I can choose this option to clean the folder and run all, which will just wipe everything out and run it again. Okay, so let's take a look at our results. So we have a whole lot of preview images here that are going to alternate between that elevation and the perspective. And these certainly don't have to be little thumbnails like the way we're doing this here. They can be larger images. I'm just doing this for the sake of time, but you might want a larger image for uploading. And so if I were to pan down through, I'd see basically I have all of those here. And I'll also see this fun little thing that happens that with Grasshopper, if the values range and gradient is between one value and the same value, meaning like 1 to 1 or 2 to 2, it just goes for the median value, which means it turns yellow. Even though this visually is probably the most optimal solution because it's just a straight extrusion, we get yellow, but that's more of a Grasshopper thing than a Calibri thing. And the other thing I get here is my data. And previously we had seen in that data that we only had the kind of column names up here. But now we'll see that every single one of these represents a combination of the inputs, 60, 20, 35, 31, 32, etc., running through those values. And then I have the resulting values from my analysis. And at the end here, I have my two images being written out. I have my image for my perspective and my image for my width view, both being written out to here. And what this is going to let both Design Explorer and Thread do is it's going to let it, those programs associate these images with my data set combination that matches it. Are there any questions about this before we move on to beginning to upload this to Thread and seeing what this data looks like? No? Okay. All right. So with my data now created and my series of images in place, I'm ready to move this up to either Design Explorer or Thread or some other application that would digest this information. And we're going to work in Thread today. So I'm going to go to Chrome, and I'm going to go ahead and just run through the login process of setting up a new project. And assuming you've already created a core account here, I'm going to go and log in and sign up. For everyone who's not a TT employee, you can use the login section over here. If you are a Thornton Tomasetti employee, you need to use this button over here, which I will have to use. And then you either have to go through your login credentialing, or if you've already done it recently, it's going to take you directly to your project page. Now, if you get to the projects page and you don't have this little plus sign here, all that means is that you've signed up, but you haven't been approved yet or aren't verified. So 2 steps in the sign up process to make sure of is you should receive a verification email, again, if you're a non-TT employee. And from that verification email, you just need to reply to it by clicking the hyperlink inside of it. And then you should be verified. And then the other thing is someone at Core just needs to go ahead and preview. So I'm going to do that in just a second to make sure we don't have any recent signups. But that should take you to a screen where if you're a first-time Thread user and you've never had a project shared with you before, you should see this little green plus sign. So let me take just one moment to verify that no one has tried to sign up in the last few minutes. So apologies for the dead air for just a second. I just want to make sure everyone who's tried can get in. Okay, it looks like everyone who has signed up has been approved. Great. Move that docked over there. Okay, so in Thread, what I want to do is we saw in our previous example that basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building up a data visualization board on here. And what Thread is basically Core Studio, Thornton Tomasetti's data visualization platform. So Design Explorer was a project that was started a couple years ago at a hackathon, actually, at our AEC Tech event. And that was kind of an open source application that had kind of a preset series of inputs. We kind of saw in the video here back in the beginning that basically the layout that Design Explorer had was it had a parallel coordinates, which would let you filter to the data points, as we'll see in a second. And it had image previews, and then it had this kind of index. But a lot of the feedback we got was people wanted more flexibility, kind of customize the way that appearance looked and manage their data a little bit more than just using the default that this application would give you. Oh, sorry, we do have a question here. So the question is it possible to use Thread for commercial purposes? I'm wondering if I can use it for projects. Absolutely. So at this point, Thread and Design Explorer both are free. Design Explorer is open source. Thread is just free for usage right now. We encourage everyone to use it, certainly for our commercial applications. We, for example, work with several architects and other groups who have used it as part of their project development and delivery. And the only thing right now we ask for in return is feedback. Basically, let us know what's broke, what you don't like, what you do like occasionally, and then also anything you find that's wrong with it. There may be a point in the future where Thread becomes commercial and has some sort of licensing fee. There's no particular timeline on that at the moment, but right now it's absolutely free to use. And for anyone who does use it in this time period, Thread, even at some point it does become commercial, you will still have access to your data that's used in the trial version. We're not going to lock anyone out if that pivot ever takes place. But yes, not only is it available for that, but we really encourage everyone to try it for that. Great question. Any other questions, actually? No? Okay. Try to keep an eye out on the chat if you want to come up. So the important thing in the transition from kind of Design Explorer to Thread was the idea of customization so that the dashboards and also the entire kind of structure of the application could adapt from project to project. And so I'll just show you a few quick examples here of just the kind of data you can show. Okay, so these are just a few of the kind of Thread reports that have been generated all using the same interface we are going to look through. And the reason I wanted to go through these is there's some commonalities in the types of inputs that get used. What you're able to do with Thread is you're able to connect it to, one, our online 3D model viewer, two, as we saw before, to use Calibri to upload data to it, or three, just upload any generic data set. It doesn't have to have images or 3D models associated with it, and begin to create an interaction between your data, 3D geometry, or even just multiple data points within a project. So here, for example, is something similar to what we're looking at today, where I'm creating a simple twisted tower and I'm running a series of daylighting analysis on it. And so maybe what I want to learn here is I want to say, okay, for the maximum floor plate area we're looking for here, with the minimum glazing area and the lowest daylighting levels, which one of these options actually gives me the result that meets those criteria. And you can see down here that as I'm filtering down these images by using these parallel coordinates, I'm also filtering down this little card down here, which is maybe giving me your readouts on the different values. And I can go in and color by a few of these things to maybe get something that looks a little bit nicer. Okay. Another example is doing the same basic thing, but looking through a project. This is something that was done inside of Pratt Institute with a series of design students to basically create these 3D printed vessels, and they would explore all the possible combinations inside of a grasshopper. So here we see something similar to what we'll be setting up today, where they could create a kind of pseudo version of that grasshopper file where someone could go through and manipulate it to see results that match. Another example here is a rework of a project TT did. This is not the project, which is simply operating on the same basic concept, where we're looking at a master planning exercise, and we want to understand multiple different aspects of it. So, for example, we might want to look at our building height relative to GFA distribution and see kind of where our larger buildings are spread throughout the site. We might want to go in and then look at different programs as well. So here we can look at retail, residential, office, and begin to scrub through our project. And we can start to color that data as well using the actual information. So if I were to go in and color these not by building number, but by program, I'll now see a direct one-to-one relationship between what I'm filtering. And these are non-programmatic ones here. It's just the site itself. And then the type of project that shows up there. And this also, I believe, not that one. Okay, this is just the other one. Right. So in that layout, this gives us the ability then to also go in and look at a specific data point. So for example, if we had honed in on just this tower option and we wanted to learn more about the floor plates in it, we can go in and look at a floor plate by floor plate breakdown in this little data table down here. And I could click and find out more information about that. And the last little example I want to show here is one of the actual first ones we uploaded, which is again a kind of installation project at Pratt. What we were looking at was the distribution of different panel types throughout it, or module types and their positioning. And so you could use this to kind of understand like where are the different types distributed based on area or potentially height, and start to explore the different typologies of units inside of it. So the point of this is really to show that there's a high degree of flexibility inside of what it is you can show inside of Thread. So you aren't just limited to the type of operation we're looking at today, but you can pull in a lot of different data sources and produce different types of layouts based on the type of information you bring in. Okay, but let's look at how to do something like this with our data. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to hit the green plus sign at the top of Thread. And I'm going to call this one AEC Tech Virtual Colibri. And save it. And I'm going to get a new card here. And this new card is basically my entry into this project. You can also toggle between cards and lists if you'd like to. And that'll give you, again, that little thumbnail icon that you're seeing in the background here to kind of cue you in on which project, because when you kind of hit this menu, that little visual cue kind of helps a little bit. But I can click on that project, and the first place that that project is going to lead me to is it's going to lead me to my dataset page. And what a dataset is you can basically think about a project as being a workbook inside of Excel. You can have multiple tabs or worksheets inside of that. And each one of the data collections that I run or upload to that can be inside of a different data set. So what does that mean? Well, it means whenever I upload multiple different data sets, let's say I'm running like 5 or 6 different scenarios for different possible tower schemes or combinations, I can take each one of those and I can share the values between it. So like floor area, glazing area, planarity, etc. If these are concerns across all of my different options, then when I upload them, I can have that shared set of columns or categories that I can look at between the values. So let's start by just uploading our first data set. So I'll hit the little green plus again, and I'll just call this one Calibri Run 1. I can also add an optional description down here if I'd like to. Not true, but we'll give that description anyway. I don't have to add a description if I don't want to, but a lot of times it can help remember what it is that's done here. Now, we get a little card again, and this card has a couple different ways we can interact with it. One, if we've used Thread before and we know we want to modify a few things, we can go directly to the settings before we've uploaded any data. Two, if I want to upload data, if I currently have no data available in here, I can click this little upload button. Or 3 or 4, I can look at either the raw data that's been uploaded or jump to dashboards. We don't have any data yet, so we can either click upload, or if I click on the card, because it knows it has 0 entries or 0 data uploaded, it's going to take me directly to the uploader page. And this is the same thing as if I clicked the upload button here. Now here I have 2 upload areas. The first one is my upload CSV. And what this does is this lets us go in now and either click browse or drag. In my case, I'll just click browse and go to my project folder. And this is where I want to grab just the CSV file or the data set itself. And the reason is it's going to go through and it's going to parse through the CSV into a set of operations before uploading it. So it's not going to be able to figure out what an image is or any other file type. We only want to upload a CSV. One other quick thing to note, which I should do this now, just because it comes up sometimes, is depending on where your data's come from, it might have a different type of CSV format. So if you upload your project and it can't digest the data for some reason, just everything shows up as blank, one thing you might want to check is when you choose to save as, you want to save that CSV as either the standard CSV comma delimited file, or you want to use the CSV for MS-DOS. You don't want to use the CSV for Macintosh. It has a slightly different formatting, and Thread just gets tripped up on it. It has to do with the what it uses for the actual comma separated values. But things generated from Calibri are automatically in the correct format. That's just something to note if you're pulling in data from another source. Okay, so I found my data CSV, and I'm going to go ahead and upload it. And what I'm going to see is it's going to go through and process it. That may not go as fast for you. It might take a little bit longer. But what it's going to do is it's now going to tell me each one of my column names, right? If I look here, here we can see my width, my fillet, my floor out. And then I can also see the value type that is. And if I look here, it's gone in and it said that this is a number, this is a number. And in this case, all of these are numbers. So what it's actually done is it's gone and looked at the data and tried to guess what it is. It could be a date. It could be a set of tags if it has a bunch of commas in it. It could be a string, which is text, or it can be a number. And so if you know that the data that you selected is not in the correct format, sometimes it doesn't like this whenever I accidentally hit escape. So let's upload that again and let it parse it. Okay, here we go. So for example, if you know width isn't actually supposed to be this, let's say this was program or something, you can change it from number to text. So this is your ability to go in here and kind of tell Thread what type of data it is. Usually it gets it right. The other thing I'll notice is that my images did not show up here. And my image doesn't show up here because the name, IMG, in here is a reserved category name inside of Thread that automatically gets parsed slightly differently. So it doesn't let you actually go in and change that. But in this case, I'll see that I have numbers for everything. I'll also notice that these have in and out next to them. These aren't required. Calibri adds these on to the data so that you know where it came from. This was an input, this was an output there. But this could be any arbitrary name. It doesn't have to follow any specific rule except for a few of those select file types. And if I want to know more about those file types, I'll go ahead and hit Save Changes here. And now it's going to go through the upload process, and it's done. I can see I have 124 entries. If I want to learn more about anything inside of Thread, I can click on the little question mark help icon here. And that's going to take me to the Gitbook user guide. And in here, it's going to give me some information about uploading data. And at a certain point here, there should be something that tells me about reserved column names. That might be down in the dictionary. I don't remember where that is. But there's a list in here that actually gives me information about, let's see, I think it might be in here, column categories, right? So it'll tell me certain ones are reserved for Thread. which you'll see here. But generally, you can name it whatever you want. Okay, back in Thread, I now have my 124 entries uploaded. And so if I were to click on this, it's going to take me to the entries tab, which is basically just a table that's going to show me all of the entries that I uploaded, 100 at a time in this case. And if I want to see the kind of reserve field for the files, I can check the files icon here. And now it's going to show me the images that got uploaded. So in this case, I'll see the prospective images got uploaded for this particular project. Okay. And if, for example, I know there was an error in here, I can actually go in and edit this, and I can modify any one of these values. Now, this is not Excel. If you're looking to modify a whole bunch of values at once, you're probably better off modifying the original CSV. But if, for example, you just know there was a blank here and you know what the value is, or there's some little issue you want to fix, you can go in and change it and then save that change or cancel back out. The other thing is, if you lose this data set at a later point, I'm sorry, I'm just reading a comment from Kobus. Kobus, if you can ping Hanshen on the Slack group, he can probably help you with that. Thank you. Okay, so we can also create new data points here. So if we want to create a new project and maybe we're just looking to use this for some small little data set we want to write out, we can actually create our own data set here. And we can delete entries if we happen to know we uploaded 2 or 3 bad values that are in there, maybe at the extremes of some type of simulation. We can clean up a little bit of the data. But really what this screen is for is this screen is for us to be able to kind of go through and just double check our data and make sure anything's, if we find any errors, then we can look at the data itself. But now that I know that all my data has been uploaded and I know everything looks fine, what I want to do now is I want to go in and I want to actually begin to create a layout or a dashboard from this data. So a couple ways I can do this. I can click on the dataset dropdown up here, which we'll see up here in Calibri one, and click on dashboard. Can we rename keys in Thread? Yes. So actually, let's look at that then. So the question was, can we rename keys in Thread? So keys, which are called columns, and this has been a long point of debate whether they should have been called field keys or columns. So we're certainly open to suggestions on that to change it. Are all listed here. So let's say, for example, that we didn't want to list everything with this in-out parameter. You can go to that column tab, which is shared under the project itself. So again, if we jump back for just a second and we go into the project, all keys or column values are shared between the multiple data sets. So if I were to click on, I can always click on one of those columns and go in and edit the name. And then save that change. And you'll see I can add a description or a category filter it. And I can also add some additional filtering on there. I would also recommend not necessarily using the conditional data at this point. You can try it out. But this is something we're going to be reworking in the future to be more like Excel. But if I just wanted to rename it, I could do it here. I can also change its data type as well. So I have the ability to edit it and hit save. The one thing I have to be careful of when I rename the keys here is the next time I upload, it's not going to automatically detect that something called infillet was renamed to fillet. So it will now create another new category called infillet. So you want to make sure that you modified the names in your CSV before you re-upload it if you wanted to do that. So just to make sure, I'm going to put that back. And now it'll check against that name to see if that name already existed. But yes, you can edit it. And also you can hide values from the entire project. So let's say that the number of panels is something you decided isn't important and you don't ever want to see it again. You can uncheck this option for visibility and change it. And now you see that it's going to be hidden when you actually go to the data sets. So you can do some filtering on the kind of columns themselves or the keys and the key value pairs. We'll also notice that because I went to the project level, my particular data set has disappeared from the top. And that's because I'm no longer working on that data set. I'm purely working on the project. If I want to get back to my data sets, I can go here and click on my data sets. And that's going to take me back to this area where now when I click on my card, it's going to take me to the dashboard instead of to the uploads because data has already been added. And sorry, Dom, did that answer your question? Just want to be sure. Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, so when we come to the dashboard editor in the current version of Thread, we basically end up with this blank canvas. And in the blank canvas, we can go in and begin to organize any set of these widgets, which are these components that are available in this list over here to the left, and drag them onto the canvas to begin to create our own layout. So let's start with something simple, where maybe I'm just going to grab a data table. And the data table, when I click and drag it onto the canvas, it takes a minute in Zoom to update or in Ring Central. I can resize it and stretch it to whatever size I'd like on the particular canvas layout. And I can also reposition it. I can move it around. In the current version, this snaps to the standard web 12 column division. So we can kind of snap to those set positions and move our data set around. I can also go in on any one of the widgets, and almost all of them have a series of options available with this little settings icon, where I can go in and select what data I want to show here. So for example, Thread automatically generates something called thread tags, thread ratings count, and thread ratings, which unless you've gone in and actually tagged or rated, any one of the data points will always be blank. This is something we intend in the very near future to start with the default of being turned off, but for right now you have to turn it off. And maybe we're not necessarily interested in facade information at this point, so we may go in and just uncheck our facade values, and we just want to look at our floor plates. And so we'll look at a combination of our floor plates and our inputs. If I hit close on this, I've now changed the information that's in the background. And let's say that this is all I want to do on my first layout, is I just want to look at the data again one more time and make sure it's correct. So I'm going to click on Save Changes here. And I'll save this one as a layout called Data Table Starter. And in Data Table Starter, I'll hit Save Changes. And now it's going to take me to the dashboard view, where I'm no longer laying out the dashboard, but I'm actually interacting with it. And here what I can see is I can see each one of my data points uploaded. And if I click on one of those, I get all the columns in this little option here, and I have the ability to go in and add a description. Does this still work? I'm checking because we know we had a bug with commenting recently. Those, great, where we can add comments and approve different options. But we now see that we're able to get our data into a particular layout. But this is kind of the same thing as the entries. So let's do something more interesting. Let's actually begin to chart some of the information. So I'm going to go back and edit my layout by hitting the little edit button here over on my layout. And I'm going to move my data table over. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go in and create a set of image tiles. And what the image tiles are going to do when I drag them in, and maybe I'll get rid of this data table, is they should be showing me a series of those preview images. But if I go and hit save, they're not quite yet. And in fact, it's probably not even going to let me save because it knows it has an issue here. And the reason that it's not going to let me do that is because I didn't actually upload the images yet. At this point, I only uploaded the data. So if we do this in the upload process and we forget, you know, whoops, I meant to go do that, I can go back here to my upload again. Again, that's under my data set, upload. And now I can go to the second upload area down here, which is to upload support files. So here I can go and grab all of my images. And we're going to make sure not to grab the CSV, even though it kind of won't matter. I'm just going to drag them onto the uploader here. And we're going to see these little progress bars, where in a second it's going to start, there we go, uploading each one of these images individually. All right, so now all the images have been uploaded and they're associated with the data. So now, with those images uploaded, if I go back to my dashboard, I'll now see that that image tile has suddenly begun to populate with all the perspective images that are available here. And so now that I have those images, I could click on any one of them, and I'll see that that image, and keep in mind it's low resolution because that's the way we saved it at the 300 by 300 resolution. now has a data associated with it. So if I want to see for this option how many panels there is or what rating that's been given, etc., I can do that. And I can also look at the associated link to the image if I just want to grab the image for something. It's available there. Okay. But let's make a few changes. So the thumbnails right now are kind of small and difficult to see. So I'm going to go back into my editor, by clicking the edit button again. And for the image tiles under the settings, I'm going to go in and set the max images in a row to 4. And so now I'm going to get larger images. But instead of just kind of clicking on each one, maybe I want to do is I want to start to filter through all of my data and maybe filter for the largest floor plate area, the smallest number of unique panels, and whatever series of other attributes I'm interested in looking at. And I can do that by grabbing a series of different type of components. And the one I'll start with is, find it. There it is, parallel coordinates. I'm going to click and drag parallel coordinates in. Okay. And I'm going to click on the settings for parallel coordinates to filter which options it is that I look at. So I'll turn off the thread rating, and maybe I'm going to turn off, actually let's leave everything else on, just so we can see it. And I'll hit close. And I'll save that option again. And we'll call this one, let's just rename it to dataset filtering. Okay. So now I have each one of my options here, and as I hover over it, I can see which particular combination of input parameters, which is my in fillet and my in width, and then my outputs, which is my facade area and floor areas, are associated with it. And if I wanted to go in and say, okay, what I'm interested in is I'm interested in the largest floor plate area options with the smallest number of panels. And then let's look for the most that have a planarity, or sorry, the ones that have the least amount of planar deviation, which is still down this 0.8 range. And so now I can filter down to the 5 options that meet that particular criteria. The other thing I can do is I can start to color these attributes, so maybe I get a little bit better visual sense. So perhaps what I want to look at is I want to look at the floor plate area. So I might go and say output for floor plate area is what I want to color by in this current range. And now I can see that I have selected things on the upper ends of the floor plate area color scale here. If I were to clear all my filters by clicking the little clear icon over there, I can reset it, and now I can kind of see the full range of options. So maybe in this case, I'm interested in looking at the smallest amount of facade area, which is going to limit down my number of options. And I want to see what is my largest floor area available within that subset. I can filter the project down this way. And so now I can start from the premise of wanting to know what the smallest facade area is with the largest amount of floor area associated with it. And I can find the options that match that. I can continue to build up my dashboard and find out some more information. So perhaps what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a bar chart down here, a histogram chart, which I will drag on here. That's going to show me, based on the grouping of the floor plate areas, which we've seen shows up in 64 clumps here, we're going to sum that by the total amount of facade area. Find that facade area here. Okay, and I'm going to uncheck the option display empty groups. And I'll save that again. And so now what I can see is this chart here is only showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the values. And I can hover down to the option that's giving me the lowest floor plate area, which is what we're looking at, relative to the sum facade area. So I can combine those metrics and filter through and find the options that meet that particular criteria. And if I were to, again, clear my filters, which I can do either by clicking this little X icon over here to clear the kind of filter selection, or by just clicking outside of the chart here, I can actually see now a full breakdown of the number of options that meet any one of these given criteria here. So I can filter through in multiple different ways. So the great thing is the two kind of charts can actually filter and interact with one another, giving us more options for how we can see the different options available within our data. So I might go in here and let's just select a smaller kind of subset. And maybe I'm happy with this. Maybe this is actually something I want to look at. So let's look at some more real values from there. Maybe what I'm interested in is I've decided I want to look for the largest floor plate area up here with the lowest amount of planarity. Actually, let's go with the, maybe not the lowest, but a higher amount of planarity up here. Okay, and so this is the subset options. Let's kind of see if we can find some more on the extremes here. Okay, and this is what I want to begin to present. Because out of all these options, I'd like someone to start off with this being filtered by the floor plate area, highlighting just this subset. The issue I'd run into is if I went and opened this later on, or shared it with someone, as we'll show how to do in just a second, all of my filters are automatically going to, which image? Sure. I'll come back to that in just 1 second. So what happens is next time I go and load up that dashboard here, I'm going to end up at a place where the filtering has been removed. And the reason is each one of these filters automatically lets you kind of start from the blank dashboard as default, which is something we may be changing in the future. But if I want to save this particular configuration, what I need to do is I need to generate a report. And what a report is a combination of a dashboard, a data set, and a filtered state, so that you can share this kind of curated view of the data just the way you're seeing it now, so that when someone else opens it, that's immediately what they see. So I'm going to choose to start a new report. I'm just going to call this one my first sample report. Okay. And if I click Edit to the report, and then choose to add to the report, I can add this as filtered set. And what this is doing is this is basically now just saving a page into a report that I can later go back in and access. Yeah, Hanshin just answered that question. I'll go look at that in 1 second. So with this report saved, what this means is if I go back to this report, now that I've set it up, it's going to take me to this filtered set here. And if I copied that and opened it into a new hyperlink, it will take me directly to this exact filtered state that we started with. And let me answer this question real quick just to show how that works. And then we'll come back to a few more things you can do with reports. So the question was, how do we get the images associated with each one of the data points? And to do that, we're going to go back to our entries page. And we're just going to take a look at our data and check the option for files here. When we check that option, we're going to see that images, ing, the images folder, or sorry, column, uploaded the file name of each one of the images. So when we created that image and we uploaded it, it looks for that file name to see if that's in the collection. And then if it finds that file name in the collection, it displays it in the widget. One thing I noticed here that I just kind of brushed over because I'm not quite sure why it didn't save it as a comma separated value this time is this data should have, I'm going to take a look at why it didn't. It should have actually saved this image, comma, this image. For some reason, it put them in two different columns, which is something I'll look at a little bit later to figure out why. But then when you uploaded it, both images should have been uploaded at the same time. I could go in and just use Excel to combine these two names and then re-upload the data and see both the perspective and elevation at once. Okay, so let's say we're at a point now where I've filtered this first page out. I'm going to add a few more things to the report in just a minute. We'll add some more pages and some more dashboard styles. But let's say I want to share this with somebody. So there's a few ways I can do this. If I'm sharing it with someone who's already a thread user, maybe I'm just doing it internally inside of a team at my company, I can go to the drop down for the project here under, in this case, the project name, AEC Tech Virtual Calibri, and I can go to the settings button down here. And this is uniform across most core web applications. At the bottom, there's a little Teams area where I can go in and choose to share this with someone. So in this case, I'm going to share it with Hanshin. And I don't want to spell out at Thornton Tomasetti. It takes too long. But I'm going to grab Hanshin's email, and I'm going to share it with Hanshin. And once I've clicked add and added Hanshen to the project, I can now choose what type of rights to give him, editor or admin, or I can give an option for restricted reports only. And what restricted reports only would do is it would let, if he's a user, he can see the report that we created but have no access to the data. But let's say that we're working together on a team and I'm running the Grasshopper definitions and uploading the content, and Hanshen is going to be doing the layouts. I can now add him to the team and hit save here, and he will now be able to access this project and edit the information inside of it because I made it in the editor. If I wanted to just share the report that we created with someone, but I don't want to, let's say it's a client or it's part of a larger presentation, and we want to make sure that when they click on the hyperlink, they can just go see it, whoever it is, but I don't want to go through the hassle of asking them to sign up for a service. You know, I'm not comfortable doing that. I can go ahead and make the project public. And when I hit edit here, under the project settings, I can check this option for is open to public and save it. And now the project is open for the public to use. Now, this doesn't mean they'll be able to edit it. This just means that things I share from here, people will be able to see. So for example, if I go to my reports, which we've just created one for this project, I could take the hyperlink to this report by right-clicking on it, copy link address. And now if I go into an incognito window and open it up, even though I'm not a registered user, I can still see the data and I can interact with it. But you'll notice I don't have the ability to go in and edit the data. I don't have the ability to look at anything like the project settings, just the reports that would be shared with me. And all I can really do here is I can look through this particular report and then I can interact with the data as well. So maybe I wanted to check a different option. It's clear widgets here. So I could do my own filtering and my own interaction with this data set here as an outside user. But if I reloaded that project, that report again, it's going to take me back to that same state every time. So the changes I make aren't persistent. They're just kind of one-time ways I can interact with it. So this way, someone can actually kind of look through the options and perhaps better understand why you filtered out what you did or why you set the project to the conditions that you did and interact with that data set itself. Another important thing to note here, though, is that when it's public, anyone with this hyperlink can view it. So in the current state, we don't have like a temporary token or anything that can be assigned. Once you've made it open, it's open. That doesn't mean this is particularly Googleable. Like you're not going to find one of these reports if you try to go to Google and look for it very easily, but it is out there in the world. So a lot of times the people who have worked on this on projects in the past, they basically just make the project public during the time of a meeting or for a couple days when they send it out to someone. And then they go back to the project settings afterwards. And then you just save the option to make the project private again, not public. And now if I go back in and try to go to that report, it's going to tell me I don't have access because it's now been made private again. So you do have the ability to kind of toggle back and forth between private and public in the data itself. So that's the kind of two ways that you can share the project. You can share it directly, which means that someone has the ability to edit or work with the larger project itself. Or you can go to those reports and you can share the reports information directly that way as well. Are there any questions before we talk about creating multi-pages in a report? Okay. If any questions come up, just feel free to put them in chat. Okay, so we created one report type here with one layout that's kind of filtering the data. And we saw in the previous examples that there's lots of different layouts we could create. And in fact, if we go through and just look at a few of the widgets here, you have an option for a checkbox selector, which would allow you to select from a series of subset options. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that one in here so we can just see what it does real quick. I'll maybe put it down below. And for this one, maybe what I want to select by is, let's do the fillet. Like I just want to turn off any options that have a large fillet or a small fillet. Maybe I made a design decision we want to go with one of those options. I can create a comparison table, which will show me the top 3 options, or 4 or 5, depending on how you specify it, that meet particular criteria. And then there's a series of kind of standard UI elements and regular charts and graphs. So for example, we have a donut chart, a drop-down selector that you can choose from one of the fields in, a legend to begin to display what's being shown when we use color by, ordinal bars and the histogram bars, which let us display the data in like 2 different ways of combining it. Parallel coordinates we've looked at, scatter plot, a search bar, so you can search for particular terms. We've used this several times in Revit projects to look for family names. And then a set of sliders, which is what we'll look at next, and then a few other little widgets. So real quick, we'll look at just adding in the checkbox widget to see how we can use it to explicitly turn on or off options. So maybe I only want to look at options here that have a radius of 5 for that little fillet on the corner of the middle. So I can uncheck my other options, and now I'll see that my options have been pared down to just that subset here. So now only the options that have a fillet of 5. And I can increase it. I can do 5 and 10, or I can do only 10, etc. So I can kind of go in and create a little dashboard where I can now interact with and better filter my results. The other thing I might want to do is I might want to create something similar to the 2 examples we've seen before, where I'm kind of creating a pseudo-parametric version of this model, where I can use sliders to begin to move through the different options and see what that particular combination gives me. To do that, I can go to my layouts and I can click Add a new layout. And so we'll call this one, call it Design Selector. Save that layout. And I'm going to go ahead and edit that layout again. And in this one, I'm again going to grab my image tiles component. And we'll drag it over here. And, no, I'm sorry, actually, I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to use my image detail component, which is going to just display the selected image from this subset. So again, grabbing the image details component. And that's just going to grab me what's currently the top filtered result. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my slider set here. And when I drag my slider set in, again, it has everything turned on. So I'm going to go and deselect all, and I'm only going to use my 2 combinations of my fillet and my width, which are the 2 parameters I set for Calibri. And I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now I can see as I move these sliders, fingers crossed, and again, we can see the problem with doing the 300 by 300 image. It's pretty pixelated, but if we'd done a higher image, it would look better. But I can filter through my different floor plate options here and essentially run that parametric model and see the results of that in real time. And what I could do is, let's say I want to add this as a second page to my report. So I'm going to give someone both the ability to filter the entire set and look at all those properties together, or if they just kind of want to scrub through the model and see the best looking option here, minus the pixelization. I can go here to my reports. Oops. Interesting. My report seems to have disappeared. All right, we'll create a new one, no problem. And I'll start this new report, and I'll just call this one Design Exploration. And I'll add this just one as a parametric model. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to change back to my design set filtering. And I'm going to go in and filter out. Oops, sometimes filter from the previous one gets stuck. Happens. There we go. Okay. And I'm again going to filter for largest floor plates and percent planar to get that subset of options. And I'm going to color this one by, let's do our facade area this time within our results. Let's try something else. Let's see if we can get something that gets a little more variety. No, it's fine. Okay, and I'll save this as my design filtering. And I'm going to go ahead and close out that report. Now if I were to select that report, Sign Exploration, it's going to take me to that first page now, which is going to be at the state where I left it, which is at 10:40. And it's going to take me to the second page with the preset filtering applied. So if I were to go into my reports and share this, let me make sure I made my project public again. That will be important. There we go. Now when someone goes to that report, which we can share with them, they have the ability to go through the pages, and so you can set up multiple pages with multiple different layout types based on how it is you would like to present the project. So you can give them the ability to go in and filter and explore around through the design options, or you can go and give them this kind of preset filter that shows them what you think the top results are for this particular project. And if you want to present this, you can go into full screen mode, or actually first, if you want to do kind of pseudo presentation, you can always hide the sidebar and let the dashboard take up more of the screen. Or if you want to go into full presentation, you can click the little full screen button here. And now you can filter and update your data on full screen. And you still have the ability, if you hover over here, to change what it is you're coloring by, turn labels on and off if you'd like to. Yes, so let me go to that one in just a second. And then you can also rate and review each one. So you have the ability to share reports. So there's a question if it's possible to add a design option ID in Calibri. It'll be much easier to call each option with the ID rather than the parameter values. So yes, you could. And let's look at how we could do that real quick. So I'm actually going to go back to my CSV here, and I'll create a new column. And I'll call this one, let me call it option ID. Okay. And for option ID, actually, I'm just going to put one word. I'm going to go in and I'm going to call this one option. Actually, let's just do. Let's see if Excel is smart enough to figure this out. Excellent. So I can just go through and give a unique name to each one of my options here. Okay. I'm also going to take a quick crack at seeing if I can get this data. Oops. Right, not Google Sheets. There we go. I can't remember from the top of my head if this formatting is correct, so we'll find out. Oops. I'm just going to see real quick if I can get the images. Okay, I'm not sure that's the right format, but we'll see. Okay, so now for each one of my options, I've given a unique ID. So I'll save this data set as a new one. And I'll actually just to be sure. I have an alternate of this. Okay, so now I've created a unique ID for each one of my elements. And so if I come back to my data set here, I'm going to go, whoops, not incognito. I'll go back to my data sets, and now I'm going to upload a new data set. And that new data set will be Colibri and option IDs. And so now I can click on that new data set that I've created and click Browse. And if I upload, let's just do dataset 3 to begin with, my data, it's going to go through and parse that data. And what it's going to look at in just a second is it's going to show me here that all of the inputs in orange mean that this column or key or field, however you want to describe it, already exists inside of thread. And I'll see that I have a new one called option ID, which will be unique to the set. And it's also told me that this is a string. It's not a number, it's a piece of text. So now I can hit save. And I'd have to re-upload the images if I wanted to do that. So let's go ahead and just do that real quick. Okay. So now if I go to my dashboard, this is one of the nice things about Thread, is that I actually have that new data set load in, Colibri and option IDs, but the dashboard still works because all the fields have the same names, except for the new field we added. So again, if I were to switch to my first run, I'm not going to see a big difference, but I can swap out data sets so long as the keys of the column names are the same for each one. If I go to my dataset filtering editor here, maybe what we'll do is we'll create a new layout. And in this layout, we could create a different widget type. We will use a drop-down selector and an image detail. And in the drop-down selector, I'll click Edit. And I'm just going to use my option ID as the drop-down that I select. Now if I go in and select any one of those options, which could be named anything I wanted to, I can now choose those options. And I could use parallel coordinates to scrub through them, or I could use one of my other options to do that. Let me see if, I don't think sliders work currently on non-numeric values, but let's see if that slider will actually work for this. I'm gonna roll the dice a little bit. No. Oh, something seems a little strange there. Let's just refresh. Yeah, so sliders won't work with text currently. I think they will only work with numbers, which is why we're getting nothing up here. Yeah, so good to know. So in this case, we could use the drop down to then select from that subset of options. And by the way, if there's any functionality or way you'd like to work with Thread that's not currently listed, please feel free to use the Slack channel even after today's workshop to suggest it. You know, Thread is still under active development right now, so we are more than happy to incorporate suggestions and make sure that this works the way you need it to work, so that it's a viable software for your needs. The last thing I wanted to look at under my kind of options is maybe under my design selector. I want to give a little context to this. So I want to explain to someone how this works or add just a little random text of some type in there. So the last widget I wanted to highlight is one that's pretty simple but pretty powerful. And that is, if we go and edit this dashboard, the custom content widget. And all this widget is it's basically a markdown editor where you can go in and edit the content and you can write out whatever you want. So let's call this tapered tower. And if you haven't used Markdown before, it's the same basic language that Slack uses and a few other web applications. There's a link to the Markdown cheat sheet up here to learn more. And I can put here, let's say, design selector. And I can just put instructions. Apply. I'll hit save. Okay, and now I can add a little bit of a description. And if I want to tighten up my layout a little bit, if it's going to be a really short description like this, I can always shrink the layouts a little bit to make it cleaner. But I can put in text or images or basically any kind of arbitrary markdown-based content into here that is going to help me explain what's going on. Another thing I can do, which is kind of a fun feature, is let's say that this is from a specific location. There is a iframe component. There we go, website iframe that I can drop in. And let's say I wanted to put a Google Earth map of this particular location. And let's just say Hudson Yards in Manhattan. Okay. And so I believe, unless I'm forgetting a step here, which I might be, that I could basically just go into a website iframe, plug in that URL, refuse connect. So I think you actually have to go in and embed. There we go. I think that'll work. I'll have to look into that again. This worked previously. I'm sure I'm just forgetting. There we go. All right, so I can embed a hyperlink to the web for embeddables that would let you go in and embed other content. And this actually includes embedding or linking to including other TT apps. So tomorrow we'll be looking at Mirar. You actually have the ability to embed a Mirar model into your web app in a couple of different ways. But I could also, if as part of this presentation, I want to have a parametric model that someone can use that I created on Swarm. This. I can grab the viewer for this particular model, and I could go in and embed that. So I could actually create a new layout with the website iframe in here. And as part of my report, that I share with someone, I can actually embed. Now, granted, you're going to get all the little HTML stuff around it, but we'll give that a second to run. We'll see in just a second. There we go. that we now have the parametric version of our model actually embedded in part of our thread dashboard. So we can include this in the report, and this would let someone go in and explore that model in further ways, but beginning to look at it. And then also they have the ability to not just see those kind of static frozen elements, but you can let them use Swarm, then actually generate new design options and look at the results of that. And so you can actually embed the Swarm player inside of your thread report. Now, an important thing to note with that is that this model will not currently interact with thread. So you are just kind of creating an embed inside another site. But it is an interesting way to begin to think about being able to share the parametric model as part of this report so that they can navigate through the set states and the data, but then if someone wants to kind of experiment or play with a new version of that, they can go in and change those properties on the object as well. Okay, so that is a basic overview of loading the data up to thread and beginning to edit and manipulate it. If there are any kind of questions, please feel free to ask. And if you have any questions afterwards, you can again go to the Slack channel to ask them, and we will reply as soon as we can to those. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask now. Otherwise, thank you very much.